Today, on this episode of The Cave and the Fire.
I could give a shit if people make fun of me because I've always had the love of my dad and through my dad, that image of God.
I get to spend time with Matthew Domyancic.
If you want to have the grounding for a spiritual experience in the old days, the desert mother and fathers and the contemplative tradition, it's silence, it's solitude, immersion in nature, and fasting. And now we need to fast from technology. You cannot create a spiritual experience. You can only provide the framework for one to happen, and it's more likely to happen if you're doing the daily discipline.
Matthew is a brother and a nearby neighbor of mine who defies simple categorization.
And if I know I'm pursuing my true self, I can be the mullet football player that hugs everybody and says, I love you, right? And I can be the badass cop that goes to meditation and yoga and contemplative prayer, and I don't give a shit what other people think.
You cannot put this guy into a box. We've hung out a few times. I really like this dude, though I do have to admit, I wasn't sure what to make of him at first. Matthew was a college jock and former strength coach, an ex-military, ex-cop alpha bro who trained special forces and SWAT teams and other first responders, as well as a spiritual director and chaplain, a dedicated student. His best friend is a feminist theologian, and Matt himself holds 3 master's degrees. So who is Matthew? I've been really enjoying discovering this in conversations over coffee. And what I can say is that this is a man who's deeply versed in the masculine spiritual journey. As soon as you try to pigeonhole him, he'll say something like this.
For the second half of life, masculine, you need to tap into the feminine more. The anima and animus, if you study Carl Jung, like men need to tap into the things. The women are better at doing the emotional journey than we are. They have more emotional maturity. Like all of us have unconscious patterns that are no longer serving us. We have unconscious wounds, even if we don't have childhood trauma. And if you're on the highway with the gas pedal to the floor, you're not going to become aware of those things. If you're drinking beer and caffeine all the time, like you're not going to be aware of them. So the masculine path to healing is admitting that you're not in control, surrendering to mystery, doing things that might be considered more feminine. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense to me. But somehow it sounds different coming from a guy like Matthew, whose muscles are literally bulging out of his shirt. In this conversation, we talked a bunch about the current state of men and the warrior archetype, and we discovered we're concerned about some of the same things.
A lot of the people writing books on masculinity now, or unfortunately it's social media, are unhealthy. Like versions of there's one right way to be a man, and it's the way that I'm doing it. So join my tribe. Whatever that is, CrossFit or jiu-jitsu or this religious group or carnivore or vegan or this psychedelic. There's one right way to be a man, and it's with me and my guys. And by the way, pay me to join my club or my group, or I have the solution to fix your problem before I even hear your unique and individual story. And there's so many different ways to heal and grow and learn the lessons of initiation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that may be well-intentioned or just complete assholes that are still feeding their ego that are the ones out there talking about how to be a man. There's videos of Orthodox priests that are powerlifting or doing jiu-jitsu, which part of me is like, well, that's kind of cool. But then there could be an Orthodox priest that's talking smack about somebody that wears skinny jeans. And I'm like, that ain't cool. And it goes back to strength is not just powerlifting and jiu-jitsu or making money on Wall Street or attending a top-tier academic school. Strength is discovering who you really are and being your authentic self and learning the lessons of initiation in a world that's forgot or ignored them.
Strength is discovering who you really are. It's being your true self. You hear that? Matthew lives a life of intense discipline, maybe even going too far in his early years, as he devoted himself to eating clean, lifting weights, journaling, meditation, all in the interest of peak physical performance. But strength, for him, is about who a man is on the inside.
Authenticity, character, and integrity, and pursuing the truest version of yourself. It's not achievement, it's not performance, it's not your resume. Like, so much of us are living from the outside in versus the inside out, and we're seeking external validation or trying to live up to the expectations of others. But true strength to me is being true to yourself, and your true self and God are two sides of the same coin. That's a Father Jim quote. So it's not all about lifting weights and working out hard. You need to rest, relax, recover, tap into your inner child play. Because if your gas pedals to the floor with your physiology all the time, you're just work, and read and learn and staying too productive and busy, that's a way to avoid dealing with your head and your heart. Because we can stay so productive even doing things like, when I've been stressed, I will go to more Bible studies, more contemplative prayer groups, lift weights with NFL guys, Krav Maga, Muay Thai, yoga class, go for a walk. And I'm actually avoiding dealing with my uncomfortable emotions and the deeper problems in life by staying just busy and productive.
I've met a lot of men who are all about the body, but at the expense of the soul. Or they overwork their brain at the expense of the heart, or they tend to their heart or mental health, but neglect their body. Matthew understands how they're all connected, interconnected. And particularly for men who prioritize inner work at the expense of the body, he's got a message.
There needs to be pit stops where we also have to pay attention to our physiology. If we want to pay attention to our psychology and our emotions, because we can be in spiritual direction, we can go to therapy, but still be playing mental gymnastics and not doing deeper work. And I could look at your brain waves through EEG and your heart rate variability and have you do a sleep study and get your blood labs. And if your physiology is all over the place, you are not working on your unconscious shadow material or loyal soldiers. And there's people that in the spirituality world that get in the game of attending retreats and doing things to avoid doing the deeper work. On the surface, it looks like you're doing your work, but you're really avoiding it.
Matthew is the first to say that his drivenness and his work ethic may have been a bit too rigid early in his life, though that probably did serve him well. And still, at the same time, it did cost him something too. So I asked him from his position what his masculine path to healing looks like. And to no surprise, it might be hard, but it isn't about hard work.
The masculine path to healing, doing harder things, is not outworking the problem or intellectually figuring it out. It's taking the foot off the gas and being more in touch with your head and your heart, which might be more feminine. And doing harder things might be going to get a massage and then going to the float tank with your wife and turning the phone off all day. Like, that might be the harder thing for you to do. Don't sign up for the retreat with the ex-SWAT and Navy SEAL where they're crawling in the mud and working out hard, even in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, man. Like, you should have nothing to prove. And if you didn't do those harder athletic police, fire, or military things when you're younger, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to do that type of initiation in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. And this ties into physiology as well, because if it's all gas pedal, sympathetic nervous system, gas, your heart rate variability and your brain waves are in no place to be in touch with your loyal soldiers, with your shadow, with your projection, with these wounds that are unconscious to you.
Again, we touched on true strength.
We're not teaching about self-love and self-discovery. I believe that's what true strength is. It's not about being a badass ex-cop or a badass Navy SEAL. It's about being whoever you're called to be in this world and loving yourself enough to love others fully and wherever you are called, your family, your friends, your peers at work, and to pursue whatever it is that is your heart's longing. That is strength to me.
That sounds like strength to me as well, Matthew. Friends, I hope you all have a chance to listen to our full conversation between me and Matthew Domyancic on this episode of The Cave and the Fire. Hey, Matt, it is so fun to be able to get a chance to hang out with you. Thanks for agreeing to do this.
Likewise, likewise.
Yeah. For everyone who doesn't know, Matt actually lives like 20 minutes up the road from me. We've hung out a couple times over coffee and had some great conversations. But the irony is, when it comes to recording a podcast, we could do this in person, but we have to do it from our separate homes. This is the way of technology, I suppose. Hey, what I really wanted to talk with you today about is um, a little bit around the difference of ritual and ceremony, and how both of those things have, I think, served you at various times in your life, particularly ritual. And I'm gonna give a little bit of framework up front, just because I think that there's these words are used differently by different people depending on who you're with. And so, just to be clear about how I'm wanting to use them, not because it's the right way to use them, but just because this is, I think, the way I'm going to be using them, and I think it's probably one of the more common ways. So, ritual really refers to habitual things we do on a regular basis, like brushing your teeth, putting your clothes on, sitting. If we're talking about spiritually, it's maybe doing a meditative sit or reading scripture, or going for a walk. If we're talking about physically, a ritual might be something like going to the gym and hitting the weights, or it might be going to a synagogue every week. That would be a ritual. It's like a regular practice in your life that I would say are formational. These things, they shape who we are. And then there's ceremony as well. Ceremony is often takes place in liminal space, and they tend to be more transformationally focused. They're helping us make a major life shift. Maybe it's because we're going from single to becoming married, okay? Or maybe it's because we're moving into adolescence and we have a bar mitzvah if we're Jewish, for example. Maybe it's a rite of passage, like the men's rite of passage or the elders' rites of passage. So ceremonies often will have lots of rituals within them, but they themselves are something that is kind of helping move this psycho spiritual, sometimes physical shift. And not only are they like kind of marking it in kind of acknowledging that this is happening, but they actually are part of what is making the shift occur, right? So it's both things. It's both a marking of it, but it's actually transformational in and of itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to touch on the word of a rule of life, because I think you particularly, Matt, like just on the little bit I've known you, you've had a fantastic sense of what a rule of life is. And so that's a word also I want to just define from the very beginning. A rule of life, it sounds kind of like this kind of dogmatic set of rules that I'm going to apply, and they're prescriptive. And that's not what it is, right? So there might be a lot of practices and a lot of discipline in a rule of life, but it's about liberation, not about like kind of like pushing yourself to a standard that is is kind of arbitrary, and it's certainly not about making yourself worthy or anything like that. In the tyranny of choices that happen every single day, we're faced with an immense amount of decisions we have to make about our life, and we can only use willpower so much in those choices. And by the end of the day, we're usually like somewhat fatigued, and it's very easy to grab like the donut or to like start hitting the news or something like that that we might not really say that we want to do normally, but when we're fatigued, our willpower starts to drop. And a rule of life is basically when you're in a place of clarity and groundedness, deciding in advance what's important to you. And now you've made your decisions in advance about what you're going to do with your time, what you're going to eat, how you're going to pray, whatever it is. And you have a rule of life that you're like, this describes from the best in me what I want to be about. And it strikes me that that's something that you've had your whole life. So that's way more words from me up front than I normally want to give. But let me just pause right now and say, what's coming up for you as well? What would you want to add to those kind of definitions and themes as we just get started into this conversation?
It really resonates when you're talking about the rule of life that they are, yeah, it's not dogmatic, it's not morality rules, it's part of spirituality that we demonstrate to others as how we're living our life. We're demonstrating our values. And if you want to orient your days and be able to make decisions when you're stressed or tired, you have to know what your values, your mission, and your purpose is. And maybe part of this is the sovereign or the king archetype as well. That just like at Awaken, we were talking about the warrior archetype in a healthy way has to have values that it's following that come from the sovereign or the king archetype, if it makes sense in that way. And it is liberation to know I can, it's not always easy to make decisions, but I know what the right thing to do is by defining my values, my purpose, my mission, and what I would say is my spirituality ahead of time.
So you got started at this at a very young age. Like you tell me, just walk us through like when you were, I don't know, maybe close to high school is when you started really tending with a lot of intention to what you're eating, what you're doing spiritually, what you're doing physically. Walk us through that a bit.
So the first love over my spirituality was football and sports, but I always spirituality was a deep component of the what my father role modeled to me, and my mom prayed with us every night before bed, and we had to go to church and we had to go to CCD as cradle Catholics. But I love sports so much that I just was a fanatic, and in 6th grade my dad bought me a jump rope, ankle weights, and a Walkman, which we didn't get much technology. And my dad was, it's all about time spent together, not things. But he got me a Walkman with the Jody tapes, which are like the Marine Corps, left, right, like them jogging, Airborne Rangers and Marine Corps. So in 6th grade, I was jumping rope, running around the neighborhood with the Walkman. And before bed, my mom would come in and say prayers, and then she would leave and I would put a towel on the floor and turn the light on and do push-ups and sit-ups. And my mom like grabbed my dad one time and was like, hey, he's out of bed. And he opened the door and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, push-ups and sit-ups. He's like, let him be, let him be. And then in 7th grade, my dad, that's when he asked the high school football coaches, can Matt lift and run with the high school team, and what kind of weight set should he have at home? And my dad freaking bought me in the 80s or whatever a $700 weight set. So I had a squat rack, a bench, leg curl, lat pull down at home. And he also sent me, like I said, at Awaken to the high school baseball camps, even though I was in 7th and 8th grade. So because of my love for sports, my dad would get resources and he would get, hey, let's get some mentors. There was a ex Major League Baseball pitcher in the area that he had tutor me and my friend in pitching, lift with the high school kids, so the high school coaches. So all of that love for sports drove my discipline to be the best I could, and also having my father like affirming and encouraging that. And I also tapped into things like I didn't have teachings of the contemplative tradition. I wish we had more spiritual formation around that. We still don't today in organized religion. I spent time in the woods with my dad, which was looking back very formational on my image of God. I'm with my dad in silence, but nobody was telling me this is part of my quote Catholic or Christian faith. And I also was drawn to spending a lot of time in the woods in high school when I was, quote, stressed or whatever. And I started doing some meditation based on martial arts books and some journaling, all to get better at football, not really connecting it to my faith life. But it was the passion and the love for sports. So hopefully other people maybe grew up loving music or art, and did that drive them to install some habits or the ritual in their daily life to pursue those things that allowed me later in life. I had major injuries in high school and college sports, major, that they said I'd never come back from. But the discipline I built through, I started eating strict in 7th grade. So the workout started in sixth, eating strict started in seventh. And then later, 3 or 4 years later, when I have injuries, I know how to work through them because I've been doing the hard things when life is more stable. It's not like, oh, now you're hurt and you have to figure out how to have discipline to work hard to rehab. And then later in college, through other serious sports injuries, I ended up having deeper conversions with my faith life. I never walked away from it, but then the same discipline for lifting and nutrition or rehabbing through the painful physical injuries became the discipline of meditation, centering prayer, Lectio Divina, the Ignatian Examen, and just diving into the contemplative tradition. And then that becoming just as much a part of my life as lifting and eating healthy.
What did you, and kind of as you matured, both in your teens and then in your 20s, what were you aware of in terms of how these practices were forming you, to the extent that you were conscious, like, oh, like this is shaping me into a particular kind of person, you know? Obviously, you're aware of what it's doing to your body. That's why partly why you're doing it is because
Mm-hmm.
you're aware of how it's shaping your body. But then as you start to add some of the more, I mean, you were already journaling in high school. What were you noticing about journaling in terms of how it was shaping you then, and then as you were starting to add some of these other practices in your 20s?
That's an interesting question because I think there was two things going on at the same time, and there's not more consciousness and awareness of how much it's forming me maybe until uh, more unjust suffering that happens later in my life, because there was also, this is part of the journey too, is trying to figure things out intellectually. So as I added the contemplative stuff, sometimes I think it was more intellectual than it was experiential. Like I will read more Thomas Merton books and Thomas Keating books, and I'm going to dive into C.S. Lewis and apologetics, and I'm trying to figure things out intellectually while I'm also doing the practices. And gradually over time, over decades probably, it's like, wait, figuring it out or understanding it intellectually is not as important as doing these things experientially, if this is making sense. And I will get more out of meditating 2 times an hour a day versus reading more books about mindfulness and neuroscience and contemplative prayer twice a day. So at some point I realized, even with lifting and nutrition, everything doesn't have to be perfect and everything doesn't have to be figured out, but it's doing the basics with consistency, discipline, and passion over the long haul that physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually is what is going to change your life and anchor your life during the darkness, the pain, and the suffering.
Just to, one of the things I think is so helpful to keep in mind is that habits almost never come out of our willpower alone. They come first out of a sense of identity. So you believed yourself to be an athlete, a football player, and so you acted accordingly, and it made it much easier,
Yes.
you know. But if you thought of yourself as like, I'm a kid who kind of wants to try and make a football team, then actually, but you don't see yourself as a football player, it's much harder to start to instill habits on willpower alone. You the Like another example of people who think of themselves as like, I'm trying to quit smoking. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
they're almost always they really see themselves as a smoker still who's trying to stop, as opposed to, I'm the kind of person who doesn't smoke, right? And once you start to get identity figured out, you'll notice that, like, it's you're not having to wrestle with this decision every morning of, do I get up early and hit the rates? It's just like, well, this is what I do. And this is the beauty of habits as well. Some of what I'm drawing on, if I'm saying this not for you, Matt, but for anyone's listening, is in a great little book called Atomic Habits, which has kind of been a bestseller in the recent years. And I think even though it's written about the secular world, it's not really written about spirituality per se. I have to say that everything he's saying in that book goes hand in hand with mindfulness, with the spiritual journey in terms of building healthy practices. whatever it is. It's about building healthy habits. Anything that comes up for you there as you reflect on that?
Yeah, there was a couple other things. I also wanted to say it's so important for me that I've been in spiritual direction because there's so much about our lives that's unconscious that we're not going to see, and we're going to play mental gymnastics around spiritually and even physically and in our relationships. So for me, starting like at 21, I was in spiritual direction with Dominicans, and then I had a Jesuit for a long time. And then the last 20 years, I've been in therapy, and the last 16, psychoanalysis. So having and also picking peers and finding good mentors and elders that are further along the path than me. So I'm doing my habits and my discipline, but I have other people that have done the journey further along the path than me, also giving me guidance and calling me on my bullshit sometimes, or trying to hold a mirror up for me to see things that I'm not tracking. And there's also something in sports that you hear being in the zone or a flow state. And then also in spiritual theology, there's spiritual experiences, which are becoming more talked about now because of like psychedelics. And there is a common thing. If you want to have the grounding for a spiritual experience in the old days, the desert mother and fathers and the contemplative tradition, it's silence, it's solitude, immersion in nature, and fasting. And now we need to fast from technology. You cannot create a spiritual experience. You can only provide the framework for one to happen. And it's more likely to happen if you're doing the daily discipline of silence, solitude, immersion in nature, fasting from technology, doing your spiritual, your contemplative practices. Just like an athlete can improve their chances of being in the flow state or in the zone by getting more motor skill repetitions, practice, quality practice over the long haul allows for the opportunity to have a deeper experience in life, whether that be sports, spiritually, or in our relationships. Nothing happens overnight.
I'm glad you mentioned some of those practices like spiritual direction, therapy, and not just psychotherapy, but analysis. Um, Walk me through. You are, this is maybe a story I tell myself about you, which may or may not be true, but that like I just say like you're a creature of habits, and this is a good thing, like in my mind, like you have a lot of like healthy habits. Walk us through, like, kind of give us a rundown of some of the habits you have and how they've served you and how they've changed over time.
Exercise and nutrition since sixth and seventh grade, but that literally changes over time, just like a devout prayer life. Like if you are evolving and life priorities change, your nutrition plan can change. The workouts change as you age and have injuries or more or less time or whatever equipment. The same with my prayer life, because when I started praying when I was young, it was all the Catholic memorized cards. And even when I was heavily involved with evangelicals, there's some acronym like praise, petition. It's kind of like all cerebral, intellectual stuff. But just in a relationship, if our communication involves in a long-term relationship, so it can happen spiritually as well. So different forms of meditation, mindfulness, breath work, contemplative Christian prayer. I've immersed myself into retreats, but also spiritual authors and leaders that were, say, Catholic monks, but also Zen masters. Or I spent a lot of time with Jim Finley in Los Angeles, and he integrates a lot of the other traditions. Mary Jo Meadow, she's like an expert in St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, but also Buddhism, yoga, and she's a clinical psychologist in her 80s, retired. Um, just, yeah, so the basics: lifting, exercise, nature, nutrition, journaling, contemplative prayer, meditation, and things like, for sure, the Ignatian Examen. I've done it to the point where now it's unconscious competence. It's just automatic. I'm constantly reflecting on my life and my days. Where is God showing up? Where do I feel dissonance, where I'm disconnected from God? Or peace, joy, and love? What are the most important things for me? Or how am I still having intention to find meaning and purpose through the darkness, the pain, the suffering, the unknown, the mystery? Does that answer your question? There's so many different
Yeah,
things I
that's
do, but it has
well,
all changed and
and
evolved. If we don't take care of our bodies, and we can, this is, if you, like I have the discipline too, where I get annual blood labs on my hormones, my blood sugar, my inflammation. I do weekly neurofeedback where they're measuring my brain waves. I wear an Aura ring that tracks my heart rate variability and my daytime stress levels, as well as my REM and deep sleep. And I've, over the years, depending on when it's available, and I've got a lot of things free when I've worked at like sports performance facilities like cold plunge, cryotherapy, red light bed, sensory deprivation float tank. When my insurance covers it or I can afford it, lots of massage and acupuncture and cupping. Because if we don't also take care of our physiology and training our parasympathetic nervous system, so it's not all about lifting weights and working out hard. You need to rest, relax, recover, tap into your inner child play, because if your gas pedals to the floor with your physiology all the time, you're just work, 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 and read and learn and staying too productive and busy. That's a way to avoid dealing with your head and your heart, because we can stay so productive even doing things like when I've been stressed, I will go to more Bible studies, more contemplative prayer groups, lift weights with NFL guys, Krav Maga, Muay Thai, yoga class, go for a walk. And I'm actually avoiding dealing with my uncomfortable emotions and the deeper problems in life by staying just busy and productive. So I think it's also important for people and for me to do quote pit stops to, like, even now that I live down here in San Diego, every Tuesday I still drive all the way to Los Angeles to do neurofeedback meditation and 3 hours of psychoanalysis. And every other week or couple weeks I drive all the way up there for a vitamin IV and to do physical therapy and things like that. So there needs to be pit stops where we also have to pay attention to our physiology if we want to pay attention to our psychology and our emotions, because we can be in spiritual direction, we can go to therapy, but still be playing mental gymnastics and not doing deeper work. And I could look at your brain waves through EEG and your heart rate variability and have you do a sleep study and get your blood labs. And if your physiology is all over the place, you are not working on your unconscious shadow material or loyal soldiers. And there's people that in the spirituality world that get in the game of attending retreats and doing things to avoid doing the deeper work. On the surface, it looks like you're you're doing your work, but you're really avoiding it.
first of all, I just want to name that if because I'm aware that this is probably true for to some extent for me, but I'm sure it's true for a lot of men who are listening to this. There's this, oh my God, I don't do any of those things. I'm behind. you know but or like I need to be doing more, and that is not like if you're getting that vibe while you're listening to this, like you just smile and laugh at your own egoic kind of like sense of like judge of self-judging there, because that's not what this is about. Any practice or system of practices that you start to put into place, it takes time, and you're not going to start doing all these things overnight, and you might not do a bunch of the things that Matt's talking about. Some of them you might do, some of them you might not do. It's okay. Everyone's going to have a different rule, a kind of different rule of life. But one of the things that Matt you've talked about, I think it's so with me in the past, is how important it is that when you're doing these things, so that when kind of the shit hits the fan, you fall back to whatever your level of practice is. Your capacity to meet the moment is really determined by the work you've done kind of in secret for the days, the months, the weeks, even the years before kind of the crisis hits. Uh, speak to like how you found that out for yourself. Like what would be some examples of that for yourself?
So, yeah, the things that I've done for performance enhancement, the levers I've pulled to be better at football, to be the best cop, to make a SWAT team, um, those things end up being the anchors during the storm. And you see so many people that are desperately seeking relief, and I deal with mostly first responders and veterans or ex-high achieving college athletes that are used to having success and getting what they want, but then your wife gets breast cancer, you go through a terrible divorce, your mom gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and you're going to be the primary caretaker on top of being a CFO. Like, that's not the time to figure out how to eat healthier, improve your sleep, or start meditating or participating in a men's group. It's really hard to do these things even when life is not stressful. So, going back to your comment, perfection causes procrastination for a lot of people. And I'm going to jump around a little bit. Here's a fun fact: 3 times 10-minute walking a day, I think 3 days a week, will lower your chances of dealing with disease or dying in a year by like 67%. So, what the heck can you do today that's a little bit better than you were doing yesterday? Like I tell cops, if you drink 3 beers to go to bed, can you just drink 2 beers going to bed? If you drink 6 Red Bulls and coffee drinks a day, can you cut it back to 4 and stop drinking it, by 2 p.m. so it doesn't interrupt your sleep? If you're, whatever you're doing, can you just cut back on some of the bad things and implement little changes where it might be a 2-minute app that you do some breath work? I mean, everybody's got 2 minutes. If we look at our cell phones, it tells you how much you're dinking around on social media or whatnot every day. Don't try to figure out what the perfect nutrition or exercise or prayer life is. Just try to do a little bit better today than what you were doing yesterday. And as you build, inertia through those habits, then you want to increase it. I feel better because I'm walking 3 times 10 minutes a day, or even it's a 10 or a 20-minute walk after your meal, lowers your blood pressure, lowers your blood sugar, lowers your stress, improves your mood. Just start little. And over time, I think most people feel a little bit better from the things they're doing that they want to add a little bit more.
Like almost always, we have to start with the form, the structure. It's like kind of like the classic line of you got to know the rules before you can break the
Mm-hmm.
rules because you don't know which ones you can break, right? And certainly with people who are like we'll say highly structured, some people who are highly structured, they it there's a feeling I get from them that they become like a slave to it. Like it's like they're not free to choose what they're doing. It's like there's a rigidity to it, right? If there's at some point you start to realize that when you're feeling like your discipline kind of tightening and there's a constriction on this, that it might be time to soften
Mm-hmm.
and to release and to let go. And I know you've had that experience more than once. Speak a little bit of like, how do you know when it's time to kind of just relax and even relaxing the disciplines, as an example.
For me, life, thank God I haven't been an alcoholic, a drug addict, gotten a DUI, or gone through a divorce. Like a lot of the first responders and veterans have to blow something up really bad in their life before they have emotional sobriety that maybe they need to improve something. With me and my rigidity and perfectionism at times, it would be like in college, I tear my calf in half after a game where I have 21 tackles in 3 quarters, and I cannot outwork the problem or intellectually resolve it. And at other periods in my life, it's been where painful things come up and the rigidity is no longer working. Just life circumstances, there's more things that are now out of my control that I have to accept and surrender to mystery, which is hard as hell for people in general, and especially like high achieving, high warrior archetype folks, perhaps like myself. And so I'm grateful that they haven't been a lot of the more shadow self-medicating things that have happened to other men, right? Like they usually blow something up where there's collateral damage. If you don't heal what hurt you, you will bleed on people that did not cut you. Just like Rohr says, pain that's not transformed is transmitted. Thankfully, I haven't had many of those experiences, but what I've had is pushing too hard with perfectionism, and then I have a sports injury or I get hurt as a cop, and I can no longer do what I want. And yeah, life circumstances force me to have to shift gears and back off. And I've had to learn that lesson over and over and over. Um, Moderation for me has been difficult. And even after I got medically retired as a cop, I had to work back from almost being dead in LA with functional and integrative doctors. And then I started training probably too hard again with NFL guys. And then I have some kind of injury and all the doctors are like, you're not a cop anymore. You're in your 40s. Like, what are you doing? Like running sprints and squatting with NFL guys. Like, you don't need to do that. Um, and even now I'm laughing. I'm in my head thinking my third master's degree was pastoral theology under Father Jim Clark primarily. And there was a professor that did not like police officers or veterans. And it was like very political. And so I got one B plus. So I graduated with a 3.91. And I was pissed because I was the top graduate in my sports psychology math. I want to be the best I can be. And Father Jim's like laughing, like, you got a 3.91. It's your third master's degree. Nobody's going to look at your GPA. Like, relax, so in many different ways. For me individually, that's how I've kind of had to learn how to accept to not be so rigid around being a perfectionist around different things, or even moving here to Valley Center. I am too far from a gym. So for almost 2 years, I have not benched or squatted because the gyms were too far and I couldn't afford a weight set. I finally, just a couple months ago, found a used squat rack and a bench. But for a year and a half, instead of doing very structured, rigid workouts that were super scientific at a fancy gym, I was just doing weight vest walks, push-ups and chin-ups and backyard kettlebell and dumbbell stuff. And then it's like, wow, I'm actually still look like I'm really in shape for my age, and my blood work's still good, and I'm fairly healthy, and I have more time to dedicate to this relationship and other priorities in life. I don't have to work out like a Division I athlete at 50 years old to still be in shape. I don't know if this answers your questions. And even the prayer life, it's not prayer homework. And I'm a spiritual director, and I've seen other people do the same thing I've done at different periods in life. Life gets hard, and then we add more spiritual homework. Like, I'm going back to when I got medically retired, what devotionals used to work 10 or 15 years ago. Like, I'm gonna out pray and do all this spiritual homework thinking it's going to help me get through, when really it's more about letting go and backing off and focusing on finding, as I would say, I'm not pushing my beliefs on anyone, but finding God in your daily life experiences more than in your prayer homework.
I mean, absolutely. I think in the West, and in a society that is addicted to productivity, and especially for men, who we measure so much of ourselves based on really productivity. What do I produce? Whether it's money, whether it's like career success, whatever. It's like way too much identity in those really rather unimportant things in some ways. What can I take away? What can I continue to strip away that is not essential to life? And I think for a lot of folks, it's like, oh yeah, I don't need to add anything more. I just need to, it's the spirituality of letting go, which I actually think is flavored, it has a pretty strong influence within the Illumin community. We probably, like, in terms of like constructive things that we do, that one, it probably gets less attention than the spirituality of kind of subtraction. So, and I think that the reason for that is clear, that in part is that I think that's what men need. It's like we are already overcommitted, too busy, and we'll turn it into another egoic project of, this is the great gift of getting a B plus for you, Matt. It's a total mirror for the ego, isn't it? But it's like, oh, there it is. Like, I'm still trying to prove something to get straight A's. And I mean, I know that that has served you, that drive for excellence has served you, but the story I tell myself is it's probably cost you as well a great deal.
Yeah, and I can't think of any particular, like I said, I've been, by the grace of God, I have not blown up things in my life. Um, but I'm stubborn, and there's other things where you know what, to be honest, I was just in Colorado for Thanksgiving visiting a good friend of mine, retired pastor, therapist, who started uh, Men at the Cross, teaching archetypes to evangelicals. Chris Cleghorn was familiar with it. And then we visited a Colgate football teammate. And my teammate has three kids. One's a senior in college, and he's traveled the world and he's done all these different things where he's gotten much more culture than me and my friend Jared did. Everything was football, football, football. And we were thinking about our time at Colgate and like, wow, we focused so much on football. We missed out on all these other opportunities at school. Even if it was taking different classes that we might enjoy or attending, there is like some spiritual retreat center there that I didn't know was like the Dalai Lama's been there. There's other things at Colgate I totally missed out on because I was so hyper fixated on football. Um, and I'm sure I just have to chuckle in my head when I did a background check for a police chaplaincy. We had to do the same background check they do as a cop. They reach out to your former employers, your former partners, and thank God the detective joked that every one of your ex girlfriends wrote you a letter of recommendation. That's kind of odd because most guys don't, they're not even honest about everybody they dated. And then ex girlfriends or ex wives don't write letters of recommendation. Well, an ex girlfriend of mine, a very devout, amazing Catholic, she sent me a text and said, yeah, I wrote you a letter of recommendation. And I let him know that you're going to be one hell of a police chaplain because you will prioritize anything to do with police work over a relationship. And it's like, oh my God. So, yeah, things have not always been in balance uh, because of that type of drive. And yeah.
And this is the way of things for all of us, of course, right? In fact, you can't actually find balance without losing
Hmm.
balance. And in fact, you never gain strength when you're really in balance. It's really falling out of balance and recovering from the fall that you build any kind of capacity or strength. That's true physically, but I also think that's true like relationally. It's when things do go when somebody says something to you, somebody cuts you off in traffic, whatever it is, and you have like you feel the cortisol rush and you're like, "Oh my gosh," and you're ready to strike out or whatever, and you're like, "Oh, there it is." And over time, or in being in any kind of stressful situation, it's learning how to really be present and show up. And that gets to something I did want to ask you about, because I do think that in our culture, especially young men, um, strength is something that becomes performative. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's something that rather than actually like true, what I would say is like true strength, it's kind of like something that people put on, like and like a mask that they wear. And how how do you, what's the difference for you between like this flexed kind of strength and a true strength that shows up something more like steadiness? Or maybe like you could think of it as like the difference between like a vigilance and like and simply presence.
Strength to me is authenticity, character, and integrity, and pursuing the truest version of yourself. It's not achievement, it's not performance, it's not your resume. And it goes back to high school. I used to tell people, hey, man, don't hang out with anybody unless they really love you for who you are and support whatever it is that you're passionate about. So, man, if you're a football player, but you like artwork or music as well, like don't hang out with the guys in the locker room that are talking shit about you liking artwork or music. Like, so much of us are living from the outside in versus the inside out. and we're seeking external validation or trying to live up to the expectations of others. And again, maybe some of the other things you said, we don't gain strength unless there is resistance, friction, and conflict a lot of the times. But then I also think of Rohr saying we learn the greatest lessons through either great love or great suffering. So we can learn without conflict. And ideally, it would have been mom and dad and teachers and coaches and grandparents and neighbors and elders in the community nourishing us with love. But true strength to me is being true to yourself, and your true self and God are two sides of the same coin. That's a Father Jim quote. But so many people have not been taught the path of self-discovery to seek who they are. And then I think of an author, Leo Buscaglia, taught philosophy. He's dead now, at USC. And one day, a student, his star student, beautiful girl, didn't show up. And he's like, "Where's Susan?" And somebody's like, "You didn't hear? She jumped off the Malibu cliffs." And he's like, "Wow, she was beautiful, great student, participated in class. Like, what are we teaching all these courses? We're not teaching about self-love." So Leo Buscaglia wrote books and taught a freshman course like on self-love and self-discovery. And we're not teaching that. And I believe that's what true strength is. And that's why even at that Awakened Fishbowl, I'm like, it's not about being a badass ex-cop or a badass Navy SEAL. It's about being whoever you're called to be in this world and loving yourself enough to love others fully and wherever you are called, your family, your friends, your peers at work, and to pursue whatever it is that uh, is your heart's longing. That is strength to me, but we need support and we do need love and nourishment. And if you didn't get it from mom and dad, there's going to be repair work and wounds to heal.
So I know, let's want to get back a little bit into your own story here. I mean, because most of this conversation we've been talking about what I'd say is like formation, habits,
Mm-hmm.
ritual. But I also know that you've had your own suffering and pain like everybody else. I'm sure a lot of it is, some of it is connected, I think, to what happened to your body falling apart. But I know that's not the extent of it. There's more there. Part of the blessing of that was um, you actually had more time to do some longer silent retreats, like and longer wilderness
Mm-hmm.
fasts, for example, and where we're starting to step into something that I would say is more ceremonial and transformational in
Mm-hmm.
nature, right? I'm wondering if there's anything in those experiences that has stood out to you that you'd want to share, where you've felt that difference between, okay, I came in creature of habit, but now I'm stepping into kind of a totally different space that is in some way undoing me, or life has already been undoing me. And now I'm having to kind of rearrange myself to fit with the reality of what is right now. And you get this sometimes, if you're lucky, you can feel this sense of, we'll just say presence, that is like saying, you know what, life as before is no more, and you're stepping into a different way of being in the world. Um, anyway, what if you'd be willing to share any of that experience? I'd love
Yeah,
to
so
hear
it
some of
ties in
it.
a number of things we've spoken about today. So I think it was, God, it could be 12 or 13 years ago now. I finished the second master's, 2012 maybe. So 2012, I think I finished the master's in sports psychology. That was my second master's. Then I was going to do a PhD in clinical psychology. I always wanted to have a nonprofit serving athletes, first responders, and veterans that would be around mental and physical performance, health, and well being. It's so stigmatized. And as soon as I finished that master's, I got a new work comp caseworker, and I barely live week to week in California on my police pension, and everything I do is free and volunteer. And because of the perception of toxic police stuff, I've never had success with fundraising for all the workshops and retreats I do in Southern California because people think it's supporting racism. So, anyways, I'm planning on getting a PhD so I can do nonprofit work, but then support my measly pension doing some maybe part-time therapy and make decent money around a lot of medical disability issues I have that you can't see, but they do challenge my schedule. And I see functional and integrative doctors that cost a lot of money that balance my hormones, do physical therapy, the neurofeedback, the psychoanalysis, vitamin IVs. And work comp called me and basically they cut off in very shady ways, cut off my pension and medical care for 3.5 years, trying to tell me to go back on opiates, benzos, muscle relaxers, and things that almost killed me because the functional and integrative doctors cost more money. That prevented me from getting a PhD. And it's a longer miracle story through my psychoanalyst that I ended up getting a full ride to Loyola Marymount University for that third master's in pastoral theology, with a concentration in spiritual direction, where I met Father Jim Clark, which was such a blessing as the next mentor I needed. Now, during this legal case, if you're tracking, I was doing sports ministry and other volunteer work, and they were trying to make it seem like I was hiding income from ministry and volunteer work. So actually, my lawyer was like, you got to stop doing things. This is just going to drag it on even further. If there's things that, because they had pictures of me with NFL guys working out where I'm jacked and they're trying to make it sound like I'm faking, like show the courts that I'm faking. And I mean, I will share with the men of Illumin, I am permanently incontinent from surgeries I found out I never should have had. So I have issues where I have to like not eat food all day long and do 4 to 5 hour routine in the morning before I leave the house to try to empty myself before I can go do something and hopefully not have an accident. So there's a lot of things. I can't stay on a fixed schedule, but hey, if it's later in the day, I can work out. It's not like I'm not a cop because I have a bad back or a bad knee. And anyways, the lawyer's like, stop doing even ministry, like, because it looks bad. They think you're making money. And up until that point, I had been doing retreats my whole life, even though I was a full time cop, a full time college coach, and doing sports ministry, busy schedule. And I would do 1, 2, and 3 day contemplative retreats, but I would never do a longer one because I wouldn't take that much time away from the gym or eating strict. I mean, that's how rigid I was. Then I have this legal case where they're like, you can't do anything or it's going to look bad. That's when I started doing 5, 6, 8, and 10 day retreats because I was like, what are they going to say? I can't practice my faith, you know? So I started going on much more extended silent retreats versus a lot of retreats earlier on too might have been like Illumin, where there's teaching and then a little bit of silent time, teaching and silent time, whether in a group or individually. But I focus more on silent retreats and a vision quest where it's time alone. And I was somebody that used to meditate 2 hours a day, do the sensory deprivation float tank an hour and a half a day because I got it free at that gym. So I've done a lot of work on silence and meditation, but it's a whole different ball game. This is where the 5, 6, 8, and 10 days, I was like, I've been reading books about contemplative prayer, mindfulness, and meditation. I had no idea what that meant. Some of these deeper lessons, because I've never gone 5 or 10 days completely inward, no technology. And some of them, you can't have books, you can't take notes. Like it is just going inward for the full 10 days. And those were extremely powerful and transformative experiences. And one in particular, the Vision Quest, might have been, as you were saying, a ceremony where I had already entered the second half of life, but I had not ritualized or had a ceremony around it. And my final day, I think a lot of these are similar. You have a 3 day solo, like you're just fasting, you're on your own, you stay up the whole
Yeah,
same thing.
I've done that. Yeah, that's not. Yeah, I've done that. Illumin doesn't offer that, but I know a lot of guys who've done that, and
So on
I've
the
done
end
that
of
as well.
the
Yeah.
so the end of the 3 days solo, and then I stayed up all night. I did a funeral, and I had a little toy football, and I had a little SWAT dude, and I buried them, and I had different hymns and prayers, and it really was ritualizing through a ceremony, as I think as you would define it. Like I really have entered the second half of life, and the warrior archetype is no longer the primary driver in my life. And that was, I would have thought, and because of my issues, I didn't eat for the first 6 days. At that point, it was 6 days. Everybody else ate the first 3 days. I didn't because I wanted to participate in everything and not risk an accident. And so I had never fasted for 6 days, which I have fasted 5 days or eaten just one small meal for 10 days on some of these retreats. But I actually had a ton of energy and was so clear-headed, and it was such a powerful spiritual experience to do that. And I wouldn't have done it if I was in the middle of a PhD and I hadn't been, quote, in trouble with them trying to cut off my medical care where I wasn't allowed to do volunteer work or ministry. Um, and you can keep reading books about the spiritual journey and mindfulness and meditation or yoga, but I would say it's way more powerful, even if you don't understand it intellectually. Go do a 3, 5, 8, or 10-day retreat in whatever your tradition is: Tai Chi, Qigong, centering prayer, a vision quest, if you can afford the Bill Plotkin stuff. Like, that will teach you something about yourself the longer you can go on a silent retreat, as long as you have the mental stability to do so.
Honestly, the first time I did a really long fast was I was in college, and my mom had died pretty, just in a few months before that. And I was in discernment about whether or not I'd go to seminary and a whole bunch of other things. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to do this longer fast. I think I did about 6 days. And everything else in my life was the same. I was still going to school every day. Like I was doing everything else in my life. The big mistake I made is I actually played basketball on one of those days. That was dumb. and but I bring it up to say, like, you don't even have to now, if you can afford to get away and go out into nature and do a bigger retreat, absolutely, that's go for it. Those have been really powerful for me as well. But even in the midst of everyday life, you can start to experiment with some of these things. And fasting is one of those that, if you've not fasted from food and you're able to do it from a medical perspective, the first day or day and a half are the hardest, but after that, you get into this sense of clarity and calm, and like when I've done it, I can feel my heart beating in my fingers. I can hear it, the blood, like, actually, you get so calm. And normally, if I'm doing meditation, I'm terrible at meditation, and I can only get so calm, like I can only. And you get down to a certain buzz of like a low grade anxiety that probably all of us have if we live in this culture, but most of us are not, like, we don't calm ourselves down to the threshold, so we aren't aware of just the anxiety of being alive in a modern world, right? But for me, meditation does not help me. Like, I don't drop below that. I'm just like, well, there it is, and I'm kind of like, I'm just breathing with it. And that's on my good days. What you most of the time, my mind just starts wandering somewhere else, and I'm like, I'm not even, it's like, okay, this is not, I'm not getting anywhere. As if there's a place to get, right? Which I know is part of the myth. But here's the deal with fasting. It's like fasting kind of does the work for me when I do that. I'm able to hit that and drop down beneath it. And it's like a whole nother, like, pool of grace and love and presence that I can kind of find myself, floating in. I have a good friend of mine who was, you mentioned float tanks, sensory deprivation tanks. Man, I mean, I have a friend of mine who had crippling depression and his whole life, and that was the only thing that he ever found that was able to help him drop out of the anxiety, out of the depression, and kind of land in presence. So for anyone who's kind of listening to this, who's not done a sensory deprivation float tank. It is kind of like you could think of it as like silence, but on steroids,
The
right?
psychologist would send cops to me and we would do cold plunge and sauna together. And then I would teach them breath work and we'd split up and do an hour in the sensory deprivation float tank. And then usually these cops would be like, I only have this much time, always an out, because men don't want to talk about their shit. And for 2 to 6 hours after doing cold plunge, sauna, and float tank, every single cop went and got a meal with me and then poured their heart out for 2 to 6 hours. And it's calming down your physiology. And the float tank allows many people to feel what a good meditation session is like without being trained in meditation. So it'll put your brain in like a theta state. And I would just encourage anybody out there. Here's a challenge. And I do this for hard charging cops. Like if you have a wellness studio by you that has cold plunge, sauna, or float tank, and especially the float tank, you deserve once a month to try to go there and experiment with one of those things. And something you can do if you have the money. I know not everybody does. Go get a massage first. So maybe you're going to fast this day if you can, since we're talking about fasting. Fast from food and technology if it's possible. Go get a massage to tone down your physical tension and then go do the float tank. And if you're up for it, do the cold plunge sauna and then float tank last, or a combination of a couple of those things. And then whether it's a park, a beach, the mountains, just go sit somewhere for 20 minutes or a half hour with your phone on airplane mode, or if you can leave it in the car. So maybe once a month. I can't meditate because a lot of people say all I do is think about the shit that bothers me. And it's like, oh my God, you know what's happening? You slowed down enough to be aware of what's always going on in your head. So you're actually doing it right. But if it's so uncomfortable to do that, try the fasting from food and technology. Go do something like massage or acupuncture or cupping to calm your body down, because you're probably not aware of how tense we all are. And then get in a float tank if you have one near you. And that may allow you to experience like what a deeper meditation or contemplative prayer is like without all of the training. And then go sit in nature if you have the time. Or it could be something to do with your partner. I challenge guys to do that with their partners. Time out, pit stop once a month. We're gonna get a massage. We're gonna go do a float tank. We're gonna go for a walk in a park or somewhere where there's nature, and we're not gonna be on our cell phones.
I wonder if you were, I mean, this is a tough time to be a young man in our culture. And I wonder if you were talking to, if you had a room full of young men who are trying to kind of navigate masculinity in today's world, what wisdom you would
That's a
offer
really
them.
good question. And I have not been dealing with young men as much lately, but this is my big concern, I guess, is that, and this is why I've not given up on Illumin, right? All these years that I've wanted there to be maybe a more appeal to the high warrior archetype folks. A lot of the people writing books on masculinity now, or unfortunately, it's social media, are unhealthy, like versions of there's one right way to be a man, and it's the way that I'm doing it. So join my tribe, whatever that is, CrossFit or jujitsu or this religious group or carnivore or vegan or this psychedelic. There's one right way to be a man, and it's with me and my guys. And by the way, pay me to join my club or my group, or I know what I have the solution to fix your problem before I even hear your unique and individual story. And there's so many different ways to heal and grow and learn the lessons of initiation. Adam's Return by Rohr is like the most basic book, but there's other good books on rites of passage and initiation. And to look at those lessons and have I learned any of them through whatever life experiences? And then Ned, how do we teach young people? Because there's even older guys that don't know how to vet. Like, how is somebody a safe mentor or elder, or is this a safe group? And if you're in a hurting place or you didn't have a good father or good male mentors and role models when you're young, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that may be well-intentioned or just complete assholes that are still feeding their ego that are the ones out there talking about how to be a man. And so I don't know what the answer to that question is, because I've even had a lot of people recently share with me there's a lot of conversions to Orthodoxy, and then they'll send me videos of Orthodox priests that are powerlifting or doing jujitsu, which part of me is like, well, that's kind of cool. But then there could be an Orthodox priest that's talking smack about somebody that wears skinny jeans. And I'm like, that ain't cool. And it goes back to strength is not just powerlifting and jujitsu or making money on Wall Street or attending a top tier academic school. Strength is discovering who you really are and being your authentic self and learning the lessons of initiation in a world that's forgot or ignored them and is not teaching them. And so I wish there were resources that we could throw out there, but I don't know of any like hard and fast resources, and everybody's going to have different preferences. So the people that have mentored me and the experiences that have taught me the lessons of initiation are not going to be the same things that resonate with everyone else. So that's a good question, but I don't know if I have an answer.
Well, one of the answers that you've given in the midst of the is that rather than talking about masculinity as like kind of a single monolithic thing, to talk about it with a little bit more nuance, right? To say that there's actually multiple, like if we could just put an S on this and say there's multiple masculinities, and that there's, and I actually think this is what feminism did a pretty good job of way earlier than men, is that you know, if you kind of think of like how you could express your femininity was pretty narrow for a long time, and all of a sudden, because of feminism, it's like, you know what, I can express my woman, my femininity by doing this or by doing this, and they might look diametrically opposed to each other, but they're both tapping into from that person's kind of femininity. So I do think that is part of it, is to say like, yeah, you know what, there's finding who you are that's being true to you, as and not to say that I still think there is something archetypal about masculinity and femininity that we could talk about. Not, I don't know if I'd want to use the word like essential, but and we probably don't have time to get to kind of unwrap all of those things here, but it suffice to say that's part of what I'm hearing you say is, you know, blessing and making space for people on that journey to discover, whether what their interest is, what they want to pursue. When I think about the masculine archetypes, I actually don't love that we've kind of narrowed it down to like four basic ones of
Yeah,
love.
yeah.
It's like I think about some of the things like other archetypes like the hunter, the explorer. I mean, think about the great, people who are exploring not just geography, but people who are scientists. That to me, that's a particular that desire to kind of go to the frontier of our collective knowledge. The farmer. That's a powerful archetype for me that I don't really see it as the role of the prophet. Anyway, there's so many more archetypes that I think speak that you can kind of tie back into masculinity than just the basic four of king, warrior, magician, and lover. But and actually, athlete would be one of them. I mean, I think that's a beautiful archetype. This is kind of along those lines. We do talk in Illumin about not just masculinity, but the sacred masculine. Um, and we would say that we affirm a masculine path to healing, which I think is like kind of an interesting phrase. And I wonder if when you hear, if there's something that comes up for you in terms of what do you think is the sacred masculine? And what would be not just a human path to healing, but like a masculine path to healing? When you hear that, what is anything come up for you in particular?
Well, the thing that came up is when you said a masculine path to healing, but the first thing that jumped up to me is often in Illumin, we're talking about second half of life. Not for the younger men that Illumin may be trying to bring in, but for the second half of life, masculine, you need to tap into the feminine more. The anima and animus, if you study Carl Jung, like men need to tap into the things. The women are better at doing the emotional journey than we are. They have more emotional maturity. Like, what do they say? Like, guys now, adolescence lasts up until like you're 26. Women are having more success when they're younger, and they're more in touch with their feelings. And if anything, maybe it's bad if we're pushing women to be more like men and deny that interior life that they're so good at. So in my life, I've gotten away with, I don't know, like I'm a lover just as much as I am a warrior and a fighter, but I could give a shit if people make fun of me because I've always had the love of my dad and through my dad that image of God. And if I know I'm pursuing my true self, I can be the mullet football player that hugs everybody and says, I love you, right? And I can be the badass cop that goes to meditation and yoga and contemplative prayer. And I don't give a shit what other people think. But some of the greatest growth I've had are my best friend, who's a feminist theologian therapist. I've only had two therapists, both psychiatrists, which is odd. Both of them focus on meditation and talk therapy, not medicine. But she was a woman, and um, a lot of what I think, and I haven't had a lot of trauma like other people. I have had hurt and pain and serious medical issues, but I don't have childhood trauma. But the masculine path to healing is doing harder things, is not outworking the problem or intellectually figuring it out. It's taking the foot off the gas and being more in touch with your head and your heart, which might be more feminine. And doing harder things might be going to get a massage and then going to the float tank with your wife and turning the phone off all day. Like that might be the harder thing for you to do. Don't sign up for the retreat with the ex SWAT and Navy SEAL where they're crawling in the mud and working out hard, even in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, man. Like you should have nothing to prove. And if you didn't do those harder athletic police, fire, or military things when you're younger, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to do that type of initiation in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. And this ties into physiology as well, because if it's all gas pedal, sympathetic nervous system, gas, 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 your heart rate variability and your brain waves are in no place to be in touch with your loyal soldiers, with your shadow, with your projection, with these wounds that are unconscious to you. Like all of us have unconscious patterns that are no longer serving us. We have unconscious wounds, even if we don't have childhood trauma. And if you're on the highway with the gas pedal to the floor, you're not going to become aware of those things. If you're drinking beer and caffeine all the time, like you're not going to be aware of them. So the masculine path to healing is admitting that you're not in control, surrendering to mystery and doing things that might be considered more feminine. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. It's really fun to hear it out of your mouth too. I think that's great. So it's
James Hollis
that's great.
James Hollis talks about that. Now it just popped up. For anybody that hasn't read James Hollis, all of his books and any talks he does, but when he speaks to women's groups, he shares like what it's like to be a man. And it's like you don't talk to anyone else about your feelings. You have no close friends that you can share your vulnerabilities with. And he goes down a list of what it's like to be a man. And he's like, the women are like, oh my God, that's what it's like to be a man. Just stuff all your shit inside and never take the mask off. That is not good for us.
I know you and I talked one time about dancing, and because your beloved is taught dance for a long time,
Mhm.
and I this is the I think probably what I was you were interested in this. I was explaining to you at the time how my wife, when I'm in like kind of a bit of a mood or a funk, she'll try and get me to dance, which I'm like, no. You know, I don't, I don't, I don't want to she'll just say something like, just a little wiggle, Ned. Just, don't take yourself so damn seriously is basically what she's saying. And it's amazing. Like when we actually, if I try to think my way out of that, I'm not going to get there. But or
Hmm.
it might take me a lot longer. But when I just like kind of, I basically will surrender to her asking me to step into something that now not dance is not inherently masculine or feminine. I think it's just human, right? But there is something about dancing in a way that is really playful and is about not and is kind of self-deprecating. That I do think there's a it's not like the like yeah, it's not like a warrior dance or something like that. And that immediately starts to shift the mood. It's like our
Hmm.
body knows the way often to get us into a place of flow or place of presence so much faster than like trying to kind of use the noggin to get there.
Bessel van der Kolk says that a tango dancing lesson will do more good for most people than a therapy session. And I know there's other research on dance and what it does for the brain. And yeah, I was a hard ass my whole life. Like as much as I am into the interior work, never danced. And now I end up with a partner that was a dance coach and a former San Diego Chargers girl. And I was a hard ass when she would say, turn it out and wants to do a little twirl. But then, we've done dance lessons and she does the same thing. It sounds like your wife does when I'm not in the mood and she'll be like, make me do something. And then if you're familiar with the Gottmans, a 6-second peck kiss or a 20-second hug will calm your nervous system down and release oxytocin. So even if we're triggered or I'm being rigid, she's like, turn it out, does a little dance move, and we got to do a 6-second kiss or a 20-second hug. And if I don't do a good 6-second kiss, she'll hold it longer, right? And try to break through
Mhm.
me being a hard ass.
Yep, yep, yep. And the teacher that I've drawn on a lot, and certainly my wife was trained by David Schnarch. I mean, he talks. He'll one of the prescriptions. So for those, I know Matt knows this, but for those who don't know, my wife's a sex therapist and does a lot of marital counseling with folks. And he'll have an exercise that he'll assign, which is called hugging till relaxed. And the time that you're to do it is actually it's not when you're already like lovey-dovey and you like each other. It's actually when you are annoyed or you're distant or something like that. And in that time, like getting closer physically spikes the anxiety. It doesn't reduce it, right? It's like I don't want to be close to this person. I'm feeling like my body saying no, I don't want this. And it's not leaning on each other like this codependent kind of hugging. It's actually both people standing grounded vertically, but being in very close physical proximity. And in that, all you're doing is calming the parasympathetic nervous system, is like breathing down, calming your body in the presence of anxiety. And I mean, we actually already talked about this because this is the same thing that you do when you're in physical therapy and you're standing on a wobble board or something. It's putting yourself in stressful positions and learning how to calm yourself. But we can do it relationally as well. But um, hug into a relax is great, but dance is a little more fun and playful and
Yeah.
soulful. So,
Hey, the
yeah.
aura ring. I tell people get the aura ring. So even if we're having a rough day, and me and my woman do a little bit of the dance or the hugging, or I'm even if I've massaged her, and this measures movement so it'll think you're working out, but giving her massages, or if we lay on the couch and cuddle. And I know, at least when I'm talking to like cops and ex special forces guys, they don't even want to hear that type of stuff, but it's like, dude, if you have a partner and you're married, you can't cuddle with the woman you love. Well, my ring will often think I'm taking a nap because my heart rate variability, my heart is so at peace and efficient. And sometimes for my woman too, we're wide awake, but by cuddling and touching or being playful with each other, it really, I mean, there's a company called Heart Math if people are interested to dive into heart rate variability, but there's science behind this stuff. It is not woo woo, the things that we're talking about. And uh, yeah, hugging and loving and dancing with people that we care about. And touch is so important. So important.
Well, I think you and I could hang out all afternoon doing this, but I want to say thank you so much for taking the time you already have to chat. It's so fun, and I know that. And thanks for the service you're doing. I mean, one of the things that we talk about is in the especially in the Pacific Northwest is the mission statement for Illumin up in Washington is. Awakening men to their belovedness that they might love the world. And of course, so at first it starts with identity. We're awakening people into their belovedness. So this is a theological statement. To say you're beloved is to say that there's somebody, God, creator, spirit, the friend, the Holy One, whatever names you want to put on that, the higher power that loves you, right? And so you have to first wake up to that being who you are. And then of course from that it doesn't stop there. It just is the beginning. Like from there you can go out and like love the world, love everyone, love with passion. But I want to just acknowledge and thank you, Matt, for the way you're loving the world. Like you in your own corner of the world, particularly the people that you're called to, first responders, cops, ex-military folks. There's not. I mean, we need more love everywhere, right? So,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
but so it's not saying anything special about them except that we need more people loving on those guys. And I know you're doing it in a really beautiful and transformative way. So I really want to appreciate and honor that work.
Well, thank you for that. And I will say I've been bugging Illumin for at least 10 years about, hey, I want because of the second half of life and the teachings on shadow and loyal soldiers and all the contemplative tradition stuff, because those men need it. And that's, what I tried to express at the Awaken retreat. But my perspective has shifted a little in that any opportunities I can get to try to share more about these communities that are so stereotyped, like it was great to be at Awaken and get to speak to so many different men, especially after I spoke, because a lot of guys admitted, hey, just the way I look, or you're a former cop, I wasn't expecting to hear you talk about those things or explain some of the challenges that first responders and veterans go through without mental health or spirituality resources that resonate with them. So it was a good lesson for me to go participate and Awaken, and that, hey, maybe Illumin doesn't have to be appealing to all these ex hard ass alpha males, because maybe they're not ready for the type of deeper work that Illumin men are doing. And I'm having these beautiful phone calls, emails, and text messages with men from Awaken, and they are very deep, and it's precious to have those types of dialogue. So I'm really glad I went and we got this
Yeah,
conversation going. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, let's get you over for a steak soon, and we'll talk here again. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Love you, friend.
Love you too, brother.